At dinner, my mother said the words I'd been expecting my whole life. "We're cutting you off completely." I didn't argue. I just waited until my phone rang. And the room forgot how to breathe. I saw my name missing from the invitation list before anyone said a word. The seating chart was printed and pinned to the hallway wall, framed in gold and lit by soft chandelier light. Everyone else had their names under "confirmed." Mine was just not there. Aunt Margaret brushed past me without a glance, her perfume clouding my thoughts. I remembered the email from last week, the one I never replied to. It simply read, "We hope you're doing well, Claire," not "see you at dinner." Not even a question, just distance. This chapter isn't about confrontation. It's about recognition of being pushed aside not through argument, but through absence. A silent vote. A subtle yet undeniable sign that I no longer belonged. The family meeting was held at the old estate on Maplewood Drive, the same place we used to chase fireflies in summer. The dining hall was filled with warm lights, white linen napkins, and polished crystal. It was winter, nearing the holidays, the kind of night when people pretend to be closer than they are. Claire stood quietly near the stairway, while others hugged, laughed, poured wine. Her mother, Linda, floated across the room in pearls, smiling at everyone except her. Ethan, her younger brother, raised his glass and joked loudly about making space this year. No one looked Claire's way. Linda announced the new family retreat schedule. "We'll be doing cabins this year," she said. "It'll be tight, so we've made some cuts." No one asked who was cut. Claire already knew. Melissa got 2+1s. Claire wasn't even listed. Claire reached for her glass but found none placed for her. The sting wasn't loud, it was precise. Her chair was at the kids' table, wedged between Derek and Emily, barely high enough to cross her legs under. Claire quietly excused herself to the hallway. From behind, she heard Allison say, "Is she really staying the whole night?" The hallway mirror caught Claire's reflection, straight spine-pressed blouse eyes that didn't blink. In her clutch bag was a folded email. Not the invite, but the company report with her signature on the last page. It had been sent earlier that day, but no one knew that yet. She sat on the edge of the hallway bench where the hallway met the mudroom, her heels barely brushing the floor. Laughter echoed down the corridor from the dining room, layered with the clink of crystal glasses. Every voice sounded louder in her absence, like they needed to be. She remembered the time years ago when her name had been in bold at the top of every family plan. "Claire will handle it," they used to say. She was the organized one, the thoughtful one, until she stepped away from the family business to build her own. Since then, it was like she'd taken something from them, not just her presence, but her usefulness. Inside, someone was making a toast. Her father's voice rang out, "To those who show up and stay loyal." Claire almost smiled. Almost. She had shown up. She was staying. But her loyalty had apparently been disqualified the moment it diverged. The door creaked and a young server peeked through. He held a glass of water. "Ms. Monroe?" "They asked if you'd like to sit in the den instead." Claire raised one brow. "No, thank you. I'm quite comfortable here." The boy nodded and disappeared. She unfolded the email again, brushing the crease with her thumb. The subject line read, "Finalized transfer of voting rights." She had sent it to her assistant Nina with full authority to act on her behalf. She didn't need the family business. But the family still needed her name, and it was still on 51% of the shares. Voices lowered inside. Claire didn't rise. She stayed seated in the hallway, spine tall, breath steady. Her silence was not absence. It was presence, deliberate, sharp, unignorable to those who remembered what she'd once meant. Someone stepped into the hallway, Melissa. She paused mid-step, clutching a wine glass, clearly not expecting Claire to be sitting there. Their eyes met. For a second, nothing was said. Then Claire spoke first, soft but clear. "You're sitting in my seat, by the way." Melissa blinked, confused, then embarrassed. Claire didn't wait for a reply. She stood up slowly, tucked the folded email back into her bag, and walked back toward the dining room. As she passed the mirror again, she noticed something different. Her own reflection no longer looked like someone waiting to be invited in. It looked like someone already inside, and choosing to stay quiet for now. Claire paused by the archway just before re-entering the dining room. The chandelier above cast a soft glow on the polished floor, catching in her earrings a pair her late grandmother once gave her, the only person who ever told her, "You don't need to fight to be seen." A sudden ping vibrated in her pocket, a message from Nina. "Confirmed, signed and logged. You now control the board." Claire's thumb hovered over the screen before she locked it and slipped the phone away. This wasn't the time. It never had to be. They would know eventually, and that knowing would speak louder than anything she could say tonight. Just before the curtain of chatter could fold around her again, she turned her head not toward the people, but toward the window. Snow was beginning to fall, quiet, steady, inevitable. Her voice hadn't been raised, her seat hadn't been set, but her presence, it had been restored. Not by them, by her own quiet decision to return and stay. They said the main course was family style, but there wasn't a place set for me. Ethan made a loud joke about seating arrangements as people shuffled in. "Hope you like laps, Claire." Everyone laughed. I smiled because it was easier than correcting him. The seat I once took by default across from my mother next to my father was now taken by Allison's boyfriend. They hadn't been dating long, but he had a chair. Across the table, Linda passed a bowl of rosemary potatoes to Melissa. "Your favorite darling," she said, using the same tone she used when I was 9. That year, I'd won the regional math bee. She had barely mentioned it. Too serious, she had said then. Try smiling more. I reached for a fork and noticed the silverware at my spot didn't match. Everyone else had matching sets, gold-trimmed. Mine was dull steel, and the knife was missing. No one noticed, or pretended not to. Nina's message from earlier echoed in my pocket, signed and logged. I hadn't told anyone, not because it was a secret, but because I'd learned telling this family never changed much. They only heard what they wanted. The goal of this chapter: to build what they thought was smallness. What they believed was me being fragile. When in truth I had never been stronger, I just didn't speak to prove it. The fireplace crackled. The dining room smelled of sage and duck fat. Everyone was talking over each other, stories, memories, jabs. Douglas, my father, made a show of carving the roast himself this year. "No staff tonight, just family." His eyes didn't meet mine. When someone dropped a glass, the sound was sharp. For a second, all chatter stopped. Claire looked up. Derek quickly grabbed paper towels. Linda waved a hand. "No worries, dear, accidents happen." I watched it all like a guest, not a daughter. The kind of guest people forget they invited. The family accountant, a short man named Boyd, was seated 2 chairs down. I caught his eye. He blinked once, then twice. He had received the same transfer form that Nina finalized. He knew, and he didn't say a word. That silence. It felt louder than anything in the room. Then came the moment. My mother raised her glass. To growth and clarity, she said, "This year we've trimmed distractions, tightened focus. It's the only way forward." There was a pause, a brief, hanging breath between clinks of crystal. Claire's hand didn't rise. No glass to clink. She stared at the centerpiece instead, a cluster of silver-painted pine cones, plastic berries, fake snow. I saw Melissa glance at me, then quickly away. She shifted in her seat. Allison whispered something into her boyfriend's ear. He smirked. I hadn't said anything all night. Not one complaint. But the air around me was changing. Not because I was loud, but because I wasn't leaving. Suddenly Ethan shouted, "All right, who's in for the retreat cabin draft?" Everyone whooped and leaned in. Linda pulled out a clipboard. "We've made some executive decisions to keep things smooth." They skipped over my name again. "Let's see," she said. "Cabin A, Dad, me, Ethan Scott. Cabin B, Melissa, Derek, Emily, and Chelsea." No one said Claire, not even once. And then a pause. Boyd cleared his throat, not loud, but enough. "I assume Claire's placement comes next." The room stopped. Linda blinked. "Oh, well, we thought maybe Claire would prefer to stay local. We didn't want to assume she'd be coming." There it was. The real cut. I leaned back, eyes steady. "I'll be there," I said, not raising my voice. "I'll bring someone with me." "That okay?" The air shifted again. Melissa suddenly busied herself with her napkin. Ethan chuckled, but softer now. Linda's voice thinned. Of course. I mean, yes. That's fine. I didn't look at her. I looked at Boyd, who nodded, slow, deliberate. The glass I didn't raise earlier was still in front of me, untouched. I picked it up and took a sip. The water had gone warm, but it still tasted like clarity. And then my phone buzzed on the table. I flipped it over. It was from Nina. 2 words, they're watching. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I just looked around and saw the shift not in the room, but in their faces. They'd expected a quiet exit. I'd chosen a quiet presence. I traced the edge of my fork, the dull one, with a single finger. I didn't need a sharper one to cut through this evening. All I had to do was sit still. And so I did. They always arrive in coats that cost more than my monthly rent. That night was no different. The family meeting was hosted in the lakeside lodge, cedar beams, polished floors, a fireplace big enough to roast half an elk. They called it the annual reset, but it always felt more like a performance review for who belonged. I was the last to walk in. No one noticed, or pretended not to. The hook that kept this chapter hanging open came early, a single seat at the far end of the table. No nameplate, just mine by default. There was an old saying my grandmother used to whisper when I was little: "They'll always test your silence before they test your strength." This was that test. The room smelled of pine oil and expensive wine. Melissa was already mid-speech recapping last quarter's family fund performance. We had a strong year thanks to Allison and Derek's restructuring. She didn't mention the document I'd drafted, the one that removed our risky assets before the downturn. Nina had filed it quietly under Dad's name, but it was mine. The goal of this chapter was clear: shift the axis. But not with anger, with exposure. Quiet, factual exposure. Ethan pulled out a printed chart. We've consolidated the voting shares into 2 categories now. More efficient. Douglas nodded. Which reminds me, Claire, we'll need your signature on a reassignment form for the old holdings. I looked at him. You already got it. His brow creased. No, we haven't. From my folder, I slid a copy across the table. Dated last month. Finalized by Nina. You might want to check page 3. Linda leaned over. Her hand shook slightly. And then came the moment I'd been preparing for, though no one in the room saw it coming. The lodge doors opened. My assistant stepped inside, brisk and precise in her winter blazer. She didn't speak to anyone, just walked directly to me, placed a leather folder at my right hand, and whispered clearly enough for the front row to hear: "The board confirms your 51% controlling share. They're ready when you are." For a breathless second, no one moved. Allison blinked twice, fingers frozen on the stem of her glass. Ethan half smiled, not understanding yet. Douglas's jaw locked. Linda. She paled. Melissa broke the silence. Wait. What I didn't look at her. I opened the folder, scanned the document I already knew by heart, then closed it again. I'll forward the action items, I said softly. After dinner. This wasn't revenge. It was realignment. Not a declaration, a confirmation. There was no shouting, no slammed fists, just that silence, that long, stretching silence when people realize they've been watching the wrong story unfold. Linda finally spoke. We just thought you weren't interested. I nodded. You did. That was the chapter's climax, not the words, but the absence of defense, when truth sits down at the table and doesn't need to raise its voice. The others began to speak, not to me, but around me. Nervous jokes, off-topic questions. Someone asked if the dessert was still coming. I stood slowly folding the leather folder back into my coat. My assistant held the door. Before leaving, I looked at Boyd. Make sure the minutes reflect this session accurately. He nodded. Of course, ma'am. I didn't stay to hear what came next. Some rooms aren't built to hold the new weight you bring. Behind me, a fork dropped. I didn't turn around. That was the cliffhanger. Not a reveal, a redirection. Not what happens now, but what will they do with this? The chair I left behind still didn't have a nameplate, but it no longer needed one. The next morning, the air smelled of firewood and something unsettled. I woke earlier than usual, not because of anxiety, but because silence had returned to its rightful place inside me. For the first time in days, I didn't feel the need to rehearse my next sentence or prepare for someone else's reaction. Something had shifted and I didn't need words to name it. Downstairs, the lodge felt different. No voices echoed through the kitchen, no footsteps along the polished hallway. Just the low hum of the radiator and the clink of a spoon stirring too carefully. The callback came when I passed the family bulletin board near the staircase. It used to be where they'd post schedules: who was cooking, who was speaking, who was expected. My name had always been there too, in pencil smudged, always the easiest to erase. That morning there was no schedule, only a sheet of plain paper with 4 words: brunch 9 a.m., attendance optional. It didn't say who wrote it, it didn't need to. The tone of the house had changed, not toward inclusion, but toward confusion. The old rules had been cracked and nobody had a replacement yet. The goal of this chapter to show the unraveling not in loud accusations, but in the silence that follows a public imbalance of power. In the dining room, Allison sat alone with her phone scrolling aimlessly. She didn't look up when I entered. A half-eaten croissant lay limp on her plate, and her coffee had gone cold. Nearby, Derek typed furiously on his laptop, lips pressed so tightly they'd gone pale. He didn't ask where I had been last night. He didn't ask anything at all. That, I realized, was new. Douglas came in next. He paused at the edge of the room, eyes scanning as if something might be out of place. Then he saw me. No longer surprised, just quiet. He gave a short, polite nod. That was all. Linda never came down. Whether she was sick, ashamed, or simply hiding, no one mentioned her. I took a seat, not the one farthest from the head of the table, but not the closest either. There were no name cards today. The usual printed itinerary had been replaced by a blank pad. The chairs weren't labeled. The hierarchy for the moment had disappeared. Then came the shift. Boyd entered, the family's longtime legal coordinator. He wasn't flashy, wasn't loud, just efficient and unfailing, but this time his steps led directly to me. "Ma'am," he said quietly with a subtle bow of respect, "the documents from last night have been uploaded to the server. I've sent copies to the external board as well, per your instruction." Per your instruction. There was no mistake in his wording, and he said it loud enough for others to hear. Melissa, who had just lifted her coffee, paused mid-air. She stared at me as if suddenly realizing she'd missed an entire conversation, an entire shift of power. "Is this permanent?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper, as though even the idea might unbalance her cup. I met her eyes. Nothing was done in secret. "You just didn't notice it happening." That sentence didn't raise voices, but it sank the room. Even Derek's keyboard fell silent. The climax of this chapter wasn't confrontation, it was disconnect. These weren't my enemies. They weren't even my audience anymore. They were remnants of a play that had already ended. I stood. My chair scraped lightly against the floor, not loud, just final. I didn't excuse myself. I didn't need to. I walked toward the front door. The light coming through the frosted windows cast a soft glow on the wooden panels. As I reached for my coat, Ethan's voice rang out, strained. "Claire, we should talk." But I was already turning the doorknob. The cold air hit me like clarity. The final image, just before the door shut, was a piece of paper on the porch railing weighed down by a pine cone. It was last year's itinerary, sun-faded and wind-flipped. At the bottom, my name had been crossed out in pen. I didn't pick it up. The sun had climbed higher by noon, but inside the lodge the air remained dense, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something that wouldn't be said out loud. I returned just before the family's final meeting was set to begin. No one had summoned me, and yet they had left a chair open at the end of the room, not in the corner like before, but centered opposite Douglas. The room had rearranged itself in small, deliberate ways. I caught a glance of myself in the hallway mirror. No jewelry, no flashy clothes, just the same gray sweater I wore yesterday, but my reflection didn't look uncertain anymore. It looked inevitable. The callback was subtle, a leather folder tucked under my arm. The same one they used to pass around during shareholder reviews, the one I had never been allowed to open. This time, it was mine. The purpose of this chapter was simple: the reckoning. Not a shout, not a revenge, but a gentle revealing of the truth loud enough to be undeniable, yet soft enough to make everyone else feel the echo. The family meeting was already underway when I entered. The large living room had been rearranged, 2 couches on either side, one at the back, and a circle of chairs in the middle. Coffee cups in hand, fake smiles in place, a little too polite. Melissa spoke first. "Before we continue, I just want to clarify last night's situation caught us off guard. Obviously, there's been a misunderstanding." She glanced around the room, waiting for agreement. None came. Douglas cleared his throat. "We should maintain structure. We're here to finalize distribution plans for the cabin holdings and the new trust leadership he didn't get to finish." Boyd stepped into the room this time, not quietly. In his hands, he held a sealed folder thicker than the one I carried. "Claire Monroe," he said, looking directly at me. "May I?" I nodded. He opened the folder and pulled out 3 pages. "These are the finalized amendments to the Monroe Family Trust signed and notarized last month. Per the terms stated and witnessed effective immediately, Claire Monroe holds 51% decision-making authority across all family-owned assets, including the executive function of the retreat and associated real estate." Silence. Pure, suffocating silence. Linda, who had just entered, froze with her coat still halfway off. Ethan leaned forward like he hadn't heard it right. Melissa blinked fast as if trying to process what 51% even meant. Douglas spoke again, this time softer. That wasn't the plan." Boyd didn't look at him. "It was signed by the board. You all received copies. You were simply outvoted. I didn't add anything. I didn't need to." The climax wasn't the document. It was the moment their eyes finally saw me, not as a placeholder or a background character, but as the one who had been seated all along. They just hadn't looked. "I'm not here to override tradition," I said, "but I won't remain in its shadow either." Nobody interrupted, not even Derek. I placed my leather folder on the center table. Page 3 outlines a new proposal. It restructures the family retreat to focus on inclusion, not control. You may read it at your leisure. But know this, it's already in motion. Allison stood suddenly. "You're doing this now?" After everything, I turned toward her. "I didn't do this now. I did this months ago. You just didn't notice." And that was the line that cracked the room. The energy shifted. No one spoke. Boyd nodded once and exited. My chair remained unclaimed, my words untouched. The cliffhanger arrived not with conflict, but with stillness. I walked to the fireplace and picked up the framed photo of our first family retreat. My name wasn't written on the back like the others, just a corner smudge where it used to be. I held the photo for a second, then set it back face down on the mantel. When I turned around, no one met my gaze. The snow had started again light, like it was trying not to disturb anything. The windows framed a quiet world, white and soundless, as if the retreat itself was asking me to go gently. I stood by the second-floor landing suitcase at my side. Not overstuffed, just the essentials. Enough to leave without feeling like I'd run. Downstairs I could hear faint movement. Not conversation, just the rustle of people avoiding eye contact. I didn't rush. There was no need anymore. The callback came in the form of a key, the master key to the retreat, which had once hung on Douglas's belt for 20 years. It was sitting on the entryway table now. No note, no speech, just metal and silence. The goal of this chapter was release, not forgiveness, not confrontation. Just the final exhale when the one who was once forgotten chooses to leave, not because she's bitter, but because she's finally full. As I descended the staircase, I caught a glimpse of Linda through the kitchen door. She was sitting with her back to me, stirring sugar into coffee that had long gone cold. Her shoulders didn't move. She didn't turn. I walked past the dining table where Melissa now sat with a half-folded itinerary in front of her. Her lips parted slightly like she might say something. But she didn't. Not this time. Derek stood by the fireplace, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. The screen wasn't even on. I reached the door and paused. One last inhale of the cedar walls, the faint trace of cinnamon, the memory of too many moments I had forced myself small just to be allowed to stay. Then came the final exchange. Ethan stepped forward, hands in his pockets, unsure whether he should speak. "I didn't know about the vote," he said. "I know. You could have told me. I could have," I said, opening the door. "But I needed you to see it, not just hear it." And that was it. No apology, no begging, just the truth handed back like a mirror. The emotional climax wasn't a confrontation, it was a non-reaction, a woman who no longer needed to explain herself. Outside, the snow coated the gravel path in a thin sheet of white. My car waited at the edge of the lot, already warmed, already ready. As I stepped onto the porch, a sudden wind lifted the old itinerary from the bench beside the door. It danced briefly in the air, landing against my boots. I looked down. My name, once crossed out, had now been circled in bold red ink. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to know who did it. I simply stepped around it. The final image, the cliffhanger that didn't feel like an end, but a quiet beginning, came as I placed the master key back on the table inside the foyer, but not on the hook. I left it in the sunlight on the sill where anyone could see it, because I no longer needed to hold the key to prove I had a place there. As the door closed behind me, I heard it, not a voice, not a protest, just the sound of someone finally rising from their chair too late. Too late to stop me. Too late to deny me. Too late to matter. Sometimes the loudest shift in a room is the silence that follows a truth finally seen. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask to be heard. But when she stood, no one else dared to speak. Because dignity never needed permission, only space.